When I was first starting out as a photographer, my first couple of years, I shot only with daylight. And I experimented with flash. I listened to my peers, the other photographers that I had around me at the time, saying, you've got to use flash. It's so much better. I just didn't like it. Whenever I tried it, it looked too flashy. It looked clinical. It looked artificial. It killed the entire vibe of the shot. Now, the problem was that it's not that it was the flash that did this to my images. It was that I wasn't experienced enough to understand how to work with the flash, and I hadn't been taught how to light using flash in a way that can make it look like daylight. So you'll still get that beautiful vibe of daylight, and basically you're just adding a little bit of extra flash in a way that also looks natural. So in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through the steps to create lighting that looks natural and mimics daylight. I've created this tutorial to not just explain how to light, but most importantly, why to use a specific setup. This lighting protocol will teach you a fail-proof set of actions to create consistent results no matter what the available light is. Now, before we get started, here are the basics that you'll need. So first of all, minimum of 30 minutes. It's not a great deal of time, so just carve out 30 minutes to do the exercise. You'll need a camera that works in a manual mode, so DSLR or a mirrorless is fine. If you're not confident shooting in manual mode, then maybe do a little refresher or check out the Get Off Auto course and make sure that you feel confident and competent shooting in manual mode. And the other thing that I will be asking you to do is to move your focus points around. So if that's something that you haven't got a great deal of experience doing, I suggest you do a refresher course on that, just so that you feel competent positioning your model and focusing on those eyes. You'll also need a flash. Now, this can be a studio flash or it can be a speedlight, and at this stage, it doesn't matter about the brand. So you can go with the cheap and cheerful, a Yongnuo or a Godox. You can pick up a speedlight for about $80 or a studio light. Doesn't matter brand, as long as it's able to work off camera. You'll also need some form of trigger to fire that flash. Now, the most basic low-tech form of trigger is a sync cord that runs from the camera to the flash. That is the cheapest and easiest no-fuss method, or you need some sort of trigger. So there are plenty on the market. There's cheap and cheerful, and there's higher end ones. So the higher end ones will sit in the hot shoe and will allow you to adjust the flash from the camera. So it's just a matter of convenience. So again, the flash trigger that you use doesn't matter. Just make sure that that flash trigger will fire the flash when you press the shutter of your camera. You'll also need a shoot-through umbrella, and a smaller size is easier to maneuver, and a light stand to place the umbrella on. As we move through the different styles of photography, a boom style of light stand is going to come in really handy. So you can either invest in a standalone boom, or for your light stand, you can buy a boom arm. The other thing you'll need is a 5-in-1 reflector and another light stand to place the reflector on, and some kind of plain wall that you can shoot in front of. And then obviously you're going to need enough space to position your model and move back and work with a longer lens. So the portrait lens that I recommend is somewhere between 70 millimeters and 150 millimeters in length. Now that's going to depend on the space you have to work with. Somewhere around, I think 70 is ideal as a portrait lens. And then finally, the styrofoam head. Now, this tutorial is about learning the technique. It's not about, at this point, creating pretty pictures. What I want to see is that you understand the difference between what happens when you position the light in a certain area, and that you understand proximity to your subject, and that we can create beautiful, soft lighting. The reason I recommend a styrofoam head over using a warm prop or a live model is that when you're first learning this new system, it can feel a bit overwhelming, and the last thing you need is someone who is standing there waiting while you test out lights and try new systems. So if you're like me and you get a bit flustered trying to learn a new system in front of other people, then do yourself a favor and make it really easy so that you can learn quietly at your own pace at any time of the day or night. And that's going to make it, I think, a lot easier for you to practice, and you're not having to rely on anyone or feel judged while you're doing it. So I think the styrofoam head works well. What I do with mine is I've just added a beanie just so that I can see what the actual light is doing. Now, the reason I'm asking you to start with a single light and an umbrella as a diffuser, say over a beauty dish or an octabox or a softbox, is not because it's a superior light, but because it's the easiest light modifier to work with, and it's also the most forgiving. So at this stage, we've still got our training wheels on, and this is one of the best ways to help you to understand what the lighting is actually doing. And it's really important that at this stage you keep it to a single light source, because otherwise you've got no idea of knowing what each light is doing and how it's affecting your model. So the light modifier, the umbrella, what it does is when it's placed in front of a flash, it acts in a very similar way as what happens to how the light changes outside when a bank of clouds passes in front of the sun. So what happens is, if you've just got sunlight on its own, it creates a hard light. So you can see when the sun's out, you get these hard edged shadows. And the same happens with flash. So if you were to just use the speedlight or the studio light as a naked flash, you'll see straight away that you get these hard edged shadows. So what happens is, when you place the umbrella in front of the light source, it acts in the same way as a cloud does when it crosses the sun. It diffuses that light and it scatters it everywhere. So what you want to do is think of your umbrella as the little cloud that goes in front of your light source, which is your flash. And just like when a cloud passes in front of the sun, what it does is it diffuses that light. It softens it. And the reason I like the umbrella as a starting modifier is because it spreads light everywhere, just like daylight on an overcast day. So as a light modifier, it's super forgiving. You can move it around and you're still going to get really lovely, flat, even lighting. The problem with the more advanced light modifiers, like the octabox, softboxes, beauty dishes, is small, tiny movements are going to make a huge difference to how your lighting looks. So we're going to start out with the umbrella, and then as the training wheels come off, I'll show you how to work with the more advanced light modifiers. All right, let's get started with the 0 to hero lighting protocol. So first up, we've got our styrofoam head mounted onto a light stand. And the first thing we need to do is compose the subject. So for these headshots, what I want you to do is really zoom in and fill the frame. So this is where it's super important that you've learnt how to move your focus points around, because what we'll be doing is filling the frame. So it's pretty much the head and shoulders that are going to be visible. So just move your camera around, zoom in if you can, shoot long. So I want you to choose a focal length of somewhere between 70 and 150 millimeters. Obviously, the size of the room you've got to work with is going to limit you there. And then fill the frame. So what we're going for is I want to see the eyes of your model or styrofoam head in the top third of the frame. So if you're moving your focus points around, by default they're set in the middle, and what you're going to need to do is move the focus point so that it's over the eye and focus on the eye of your model. Okay, so now that we've composed our shot, the next step is to expose the shot. All right, so there's no flash involved at this stage. With your camera set up, you've got your image composed, fill the frame with your model. What I want you to do is set your camera's ISO to its lowest native setting. Now on my Canon camera, the lowest ISO I can set it to is 100 ISO. Other cameras might be slightly higher at 160 ISO or 200 ISO. It depends on the particular brand that you're working with. Once you've got your ISO set, I want you to set your shutter speed to 1/60th of a second, and then without changing the ISO or the shutter speed, what I want you to do is stop down to f8. Now, the reason we're doing this is to eliminate any ambient light in the room. So you can see here that as I stop down, the frame gets darker and darker and darker. And the reason to eliminate ambient light from the room is I want to create a style of lighting where it's only the flash that's lighting your subject. And this is for two reasons. Firstly, because you're learning, I want you to understand what the flash is doing to your model, and I don't want you to be influenced by any other light that's in the room. So we're only using flash to light our model. The second reason to eliminate all ambient light is that this particular style of shooting is going to give you the most consistent style of lighting. So let's just say you're going to be spending a day in a location where you might have beautiful daylight early in the morning, and then by afternoon the room is flooded with sunlight. If you are relying on ambient light, that's going to change your settings, and that's going to have a big impact on the final result of your images. But if we eliminate all ambient light from the room and only rely on our flash, every single frame that you take over the course of the day, regardless of what's going on outside, whether it's the sun shining or it's pouring with rain or it's nighttime, your images are all going to look the same. All right, so we've composed our image, stopped down, we've got the settings ISO 100, 1/160th of a second, and an f-stop of f8. Take our first frame, and we should see a black frame, or you might just be able to make out the outline of your image, but it's dark. The ambient light is now no longer influencing the image. Okay, so now we're ready to bring in the light. So you have your styrofoam head or your model positioned approximately 5 feet from your background. This is going to stop you getting any shadows on the background. I want you to position your light with the shoot-through umbrella approximately 1 meter or 3 foot from your model on a 45-degree angle. Your camera height is set so that you are shooting your model just below eye level so that they appear to be powerful and the hero of the frame. And I want you to have a minimum focal length, if your lens kit allows it, of 70 millimeters. All right, so we're shooting long and from a lower angle. All right, so here's what that looks like from my camera angle. So you can see that I've got my light, which in this instance I'm using the Godox AD200, very similar to a speed light, slightly more powerful, slightly. So, and you can see that I've got the bracket there so that I can mount my speed light to my studio stand, light stand there, and then there's also a hole there for the easily to, so you can mount the shoot through umbrella. Now, first thing you want to do, regardless of whether you're using a speed light, something like the AD200, which I'm using here, or a studio light, what I want you to do first of all is make sure that if you that your light is set to manual mode. So just go through the mode settings and make sure that you've got your light set not on TTL, it must be on manual mode. Then you need to change the power settings. So you don't want to start at full power. Probably somewhere around a quarter power is a good starting point. Now, I can't tell you an exact starting point because it's going to depend on the location that you're shooting in and also the power of the light that you're using. So just as a general good starting point, I want you to set the power of your light to a quarter power, and then we will test that out and go from there. Okay, so I'm using a remote trigger that will sit on my camera, so I can actually adjust the power of my light from my trigger, which just makes life easier. It just means you're not having to get up from behind the camera to adjust your light settings. So if you've got one of these kinds of triggers, or you've got a different kind, basically they're all the same. It's just a matter of convenience. So this one just sits on top of the camera there. It's designed specifically for my Canon, and from here I can increase or decrease the power of my flash. So with my flash set to a quarter power, everything remains the same. I'm still at f8, I'm at ISO 100, and I'm at 1/160th of a second. I've got my umbrella positioned there. It's a little bit further away from my model that I would normally shoot, but I want you to see the difference between shooting with the light up very close and having it slightly backed off. So once I've got everything in place, I'm going to take a test shot. All right, so we can see that at a quarter power, it's too hot. The light's too hot. We can see that there's no detail on the camera right side at all. So I need to adjust my power. So I'm going to drop my power down to an 1/8 setting now and take another shot. And looking better, but still blown out camera right. You can see, you notice there is no detail camera right. So that's still underexposed. So I go back and I'm going to now lower my setting again from an 1/8 power to a 1/16 power. All right, so just drop it down and we're going to take another shot and we'll have a look at that. And much better. I still think it's a little bit hot, camera right. Some little blown out areas of skin tone. So I'm going to drop it down one more time to 132 power. And let's have a look at what that looks like. And there we go. So I've got the correct exposure there. So nothing is blown out. Now I want to finesse the light. The light is far away, and what I'm particularly concerned about is the heavy shadow on the nose. I want to be able to soften that, and I want to be able to soften the light overall. Okay, so now we're going to work on getting that light much softer. So what I want you to do is move that umbrella right up next to your model. Very, very close. Do not worry if your umbrella now enters the frame. You can see it in the image. Don't worry about any of that. This is all about how the lighting looks. So your frame should look something like this with the umbrella in the shot. Now, I also want you to notice how there's all this dappled sunlight in my office now as I shoot. And this is one of the main reasons why this system of shooting, this protocol that I use, is that it will eliminate all the changing light throughout the day, and it's not going to matter. My lighting is still going to remain consistent. Now, keep everything the same, and what you're going to do is keep the light setting the same. We're just moving the light closer. I'm going to stay with my earlier setting of my power is at 132, and I'm going to take another shot. All right, so now that I've moved my light closer, it's going to be more powerful. So what I need to do is lower the power. So I'm going to drop that power to down by a stop, so to 164 power. And you can see now when I take another shot that is looking good. The other thing that I want you to notice is just how soft that light is, and in particular the transitions from highlights, camera right, to shadow, camera left. Let's compare it to the first image that we took where the light was further back. Can you notice how much harder that nose shadow is there, and how generally that transition isn't as smooth? So you can see that simply by moving the light closer, what you're doing is you're getting more shadowing on one side, so the fall off is more rapid, so that increases the contrast and the mood of the shot, but you also get a softer transition from highlight to shadow, and that is the secret of natural and authentic looking images. No harsh shadows. Okay, so if you want to soften those shadows even further, you can bring a reflector over to camera left, and that's filling in the light. You can see without the reflector here, and here is another setup that you can use. So I've added a diffuser, camera right, in front of my umbrella. So now I've got a double diffuse light source with a reflector, camera left, and you can see now that this lighting is beautiful. It looks very natural. There's no hint of shadows, and it looks like it could even be window light. If you want to create more mood in the image, what you can do with this exact setup is instead of using a white reflector, you can use a black cutter. Now, what the black will do is it will cut the amount of light. So you won't have white light being reflected into the camera left side. You'll have black being reflected into the camera left side. So it increases the contrast. So if you want to add more mood to your image, then you can add a black. If you want to open up and reduce the contrast of your image, you can add a white reflector. So using a single light source, in a matter of minutes, we've managed to go from something that looks hard and unnatural to a light source that looks even, natural, and soft. Now, this simple one light and one reflector setup can be used in many, many different situations. I use it for lifestyle, for headshots. I've used it in advertising shoots. It's the basis of many, many of my portrait setups. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take this setup up a couple of notches, and we'll experiment with some different lighting styles.